Om, Om, Om. So continuing with our study here. So the original Buddhism precedes the Abhidharma period. Okay, Abhidharma text we will see. As we go by, the details will come. And it says, it is a dogmatic doctrine in that it has for its backbone a great number of numerical lists, which were in all probability later elaborations of the Buddha's teaching. It represents the common doctrine of all Buddhist monks. It represents the common doctrine of all Buddhist monks. And the author says, this book deals exclusively with the monkish elite and their life of meditation. As a religion, Buddhism had also to make provision for the masses, whose bhaktic, means devotional, and magical beliefs are only lightly touched upon here. The Tantra, which is a literary elaboration of the stupa worship of the laymen, therefore also falls outside the purview of this book, means the author's current book. So it does not deal with them, but primarily deals with the study and the procedures of the monks. Because obviously he wants to reach to the final goal of nirvana, so which is more applicable to the monk who is fully committed to this. It represents the common doctrine of all Buddhist monks, as it may well have existed about 300 to 250 BC. 300 to 250 BC means after 250 years, because 480, if we assume Buddha's time, so from 480 to 250 BC we came, so about 200 plus years have to pass, 250 years have to pass, and only that time we have available literature. My description of it is based on lists, formulas, and statements found in the writings of all schools, and therefore likely to form part of the undifferentiated pre-Hinayana and pre-Mahayana Buddhism of Ashoka's time. So he says he has picked whatever available literature as we listed from Mahasangika, Sthabira documents, whatever they could lay on. So he says his my description of it is based on lists, formulas, and statements found in the writings of all schools, and therefore likely to form part of the undifferentiated pre-Hinayana and pre-Mahayana Buddhism of Ashoka's time. So during the Ashoka's time, it was still an integral whole. That's what is the assumption. The views I describe in part 1 were common to all Buddhists. So what we are going to study in this part 1, as we said, the 116 pages document, he believes these were common to all the Buddhist sects. They were accepted not only by Theravadins and Sarvastivadins, but also shared by the Mahayanists, who are the linear descendants of the Mahasanghikas. The Mahayana is a later development of Mahasanghikas. So these concepts that are being discussed, going to be discussed now, are common to all of them. So that's how he thinks these are part of the original or archaic Buddhism. Their basic formulation is taken from the sutras. But in actual fact, I have made much use of later commentators. Even though they are taken from the sutras, the commentaries are all much later. For the base statements of the sutras often become intelligible only with the help of commentarial literature. If you take the basic sutras themselves, that is spoken words of Buddha, we ordinary people cannot really understand much unless you take help of the commentary literature. It is here that my treatment is most open to criticism, in a probably excessive reaction against some of my predecessors who, like K.E. Newman, regarded the commentators as idiotic nitwits who had invariably misunderstood the Buddha's message, I am inclined to believe that they generally caught his meaning fairly correctly. So Conze thinks the commentators should have been pretty close to what Buddha intended to say. In consequence, it may well be argued that much of what I ascribe to Archaic Buddhism really belongs to the scholastics of Part 2 or to the Mahayanas of Part 3. So though we are now talking about Part 1, which is Archaic or Original Buddhism, the sutras, as they are available in fragments or in whole from various things, to understand them we have to depend on a lot on the commentators, which obviously are later developments. So these commentaries belong to the Sthaviras literature, which means, the Sarvastivadins, as we mentioned, Theravadins and so on. And later developments of Mahayana, who are branch of Mahasangikas, their document, commentaries. So ultimately, we have a great influence of the later period while describing the earlier period. That's what he says here. In our survey of Archaic Buddhism, we first, that is the current chapter 3, consider the features of the world around us which make it into a most unsatisfactory place to live in. Sorry, I said, right now we are in chapter 2, as I said, studying the problems. So chapter 3 is when we are going to start very soon, where we start about this doctrine itself. So he says, in our survey of the Archaic Buddhism, we first consider in the next chapter 3 the features of the world around us, which make it into a most unsatisfactory place to live in, although we are rarely aware of their full significance. So what is interesting is, whether it be Buddhism or Hinduism, we have to consider and answer 3 things. What is the world around me? Who am I or what am I? And is there a significant force or a source or a God other than and separate from this world and the individual? So to begin with, of course, Buddhism and also Advan Conze in the next chapter starts with investigating the world, or rather our experience of the world in the next chapter, which obviously unsatisfactory as we are living here. Dissatisfied with this world, we try to get out of it. In order to do so, we must first of all generate 5 cardinal virtues, which are described in chapter 4. If one is satisfied with the goings of this world, they would never make any effort. In fact, they should not. They will not make any effort to go out of this worldly living if they are satisfied. Only those who are not satisfied would investigate and try to get away if they find means. So the means to do that, escaping from the world of suffering, is to develop those cardinal virtues which are going to be described in chapter 4. Cardinal virtues, 5 cardinal virtues. When these have done their work, over a long period of time, we arrive at chapter 5 at the final stages of the process of deliverance, which ends up in nirvana. So the cardinal virtues have to be developed for a long period of time. And then we may arrive at a situation of just before nirvana. That is the final stages of deliverance. We come there, which if you pass through those final stages, we will end up with nirvana. By way of an afterthought, a few words must then, chapter 6, be said about the 4 virtues of friendliness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and impartiality. I mentioned in the earlier occasion, these are called the Brahma Viharas. Brahma Viharas are divine virtues. Though these are required even now, it's not that they are something to be developed after all the cardinal virtues. These are required here because these are the required qualities for living in this society harmoniously, peacefully. So friendliness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and impartiality. which to some extent stand outside the other Buddhist methods of achieving salvation. So these are not the principal, I should say, virtues. Earlier we called cardinal virtues. These are not counted as cardinal virtues. So these stand outside the other Buddhist methods of achieving salvation. Finally, chapter 7 and 8, we come to the Dharma theory, which logically speaking should have been discussed first of all. I too feel the same. Maybe we are using the word Dharma so often, but still our understanding of what is Dharma may not be complete, except a few fragmented statements that we may make for being able to understand the fundamental theory of experience of the world, cardinal virtues for salvation, and the final stages of deliverance, and the nirvana. So that is the crux of the matter. But in between, of course, the Brahma Viharas are there, and to support that, and throughout this process, we need to understand clearly the Dharma. So that is discussed in chapter 7, Dharma theory, which logically speaking should have been discussed first of all, but which is so difficult that for pedagogical reasons, it has been kept to the last. So obviously it is difficult, but maybe I will take a chance and read it also as an introduction, though we may not complete that, so that you have an idea as to what it means when we keep saying Dharma, Dharma, you see. Then, most of the problems and ideas which interested Buddhist thinkers are discussed on 3 different levels in the 3 parts of this book. Most of the problems and ideas which interested Buddhist thinkers are discussed on 3 different levels in the 3 parts of this book. It is only the levels that we are talking about. It's not that there are going to be different and new problems discussed in part 1, part 2, part 3. That is why even if we master part 1 completely, we must find deliverance. Of course, there may be still some doubts left, some areas not clear. So that is how the Hinayana, that is then we do an exhaustive study of dharmas, which is coming from the Sthaviras and the Sarvastivadins, Abhidharma particularly. And then later on we go to Mahayanist view of the same sutra concepts in a different dimension, which ultimately should aid one another to the highest possible definitions of nirvana. Are discussed on 3 different levels in the 3 parts of the book, that is, as they appeared to the archaic, scholastic and Mahayana Buddhism. If only for reasons of space, the philosophical arguments are treated as self-sufficient lines of thought, related only to the meditational practices of the monks. This is where I think this book will be very helpful. I think, in fact, somebody asked me about, okay, how to go about this meditation thing. So this book certainly answers some of those tools. Okay, if only for reasons of space and philosophical arguments, if only for reasons of space, the philosophical arguments are treated as self-sufficient lines of thought. Means part 1 is sufficient in itself, part 2 is sufficient in itself, part 3 is sufficient in itself, related only to the meditational practices of the monks. The connection between Buddhism and Hinduism is left wholly untouched, although the Buddhists were in constant interaction with their Hindu environment. It is nevertheless quite possible to treat Buddhism as an autonomous system which is perfectly intelligible on its own premises. Because he is not going to do a comparison between Hinduism and Buddhism, etc., except a couple of sentences here and there. Nor has any attempt been made to relate Buddhist thought to the society within which it developed. The hierarchical framework has been left out partly because I have described it elsewhere and cannot repeat myself indefinitely. So it talks about Part 1, Chapter 2, 4. In B and A Short History of Buddhism. So Edward Conze has another book of his, which is called Buddhism and A Short History of Buddhism. So the other, in fact, there are two separate books actually. One book is titled simply Buddhism, its development, etc. I think that's how it is titled. And the second one, A Short History of Buddhism. Two separate small books, which were penned by him. So he's simply referring, I'm not repeating. The historical framework has been left out partly because I have described it elsewhere and cannot repeat myself indefinitely. The historical framework of Buddhism to Indian society, he says he has discussed them. I personally have not studied them yet, though I do have those books. Okay. There are few dates, few names, hardly any references to Indian history. And the bewildered reader may at times clutch for a few hard facts. There are none. Means there are no hard facts at all. He is here asked to take the Buddha's doctrine as something which, like other great religious systems, came out of the blue. Why, we know not. Independent and irrespective of the historical context. So we are supposed to study Buddhism as a standalone system and not really making an effort to the context of the society, etc. And he says most of the religious systems are treated that way. Like the holy dharma itself, this approach is in conflict with the accepted canons of present-day historiography. So obviously the current way of writing history does not account in this fashion. It will nevertheless be seen that the survey of Buddhist ideas by itself makes a fascinating story, the mere recital of which must exhilarate everyone who can think. So this is how he presented the context of the problems of original Buddhism, because we really don't have any literature, in perfect reliability from the time of the Buddha, but the least available is from the time of Mahasangikas, from the Staviras, which probably are the original torchbearers, and from there the Mahasangikas separated in 140 years after the Buddhist era, and later on further divisions came about, which we will see in the next chapters. So we have to pick up the fragment from them and build. That's what Edward Conze has done. And there is a lot of support taken from the commentarial literature of the same sutras. So however, sutras being the main source, he has done a great job in pointing out, and even understanding that much is very helpful, whether it be Buddhists or Hindus, because ideas are exactly same. And if my intelligence permits and my memory helps me, I would try and quote where similar statements occur in the Bhagavad Gita or in the Upanishads, as and when I can recollect or point them out to you. So they're exactly same. Om. Of course, this is a short chapter. I would strongly urge any of you to give me your feedback, whether this effort of mine for reading and for you to listen to, with additional words from my end, with a minimal value maybe, but my whole goal is primarily to encourage you to take up a closer study. And I would be delighted if you have any specific questions for me, so I can also ponder, research, and let you know. And the most important thing, I want you to follow. Make a curriculum for yourself and follow through. And another reason I would like to say, why did I take Buddhism? Because, not because I have any extra bias or favoritism for Buddhism, leaving the Hinduism the Upanishadic teaching behind. No. The reason is there are many resources where people keep speaking in the YouTube and Facebook, etc. And there are many teachers in India who keep teaching the Hindu Upanishads. But I think a lot is neglected from the Buddhist fold because of the animosity that prevailed in the last maybe 1500 years in India. In fact, I myself was a victim of that kind of thinking, that I did not really pursue Buddhistic thought for a long time. Only during the last 5 years I was quite impressed when I found great help from many of the statements of the Buddha. And I, in fact, find now that his life and teachings are a commentary on the Upanishadic statements. So that way you can do a complementary study whereby strengthen. So I would be reading some text, some main teachings of the Upanishad and Acharya Shankara also parallelly, so that somebody may not be discouraged, which I think would convey to you that I am personally seeing both of them as equivalents. Okay. Thank you. I look forward for your feedback and any questions that you may have. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.